The woman who built a $3 billion empire, teaching others to live their best lives, hasn't been able to sleep without medication since 2011. When she discovered her South African girls' school, her greatest legacy was hiding sexual abuse scandals she'd enabled through blind trust. Oprah Winfrey, who transformed trauma into triumph for millions of viewers, now takes antidepressants for the realization that her weight struggles were actually undiagnosed binge-eating disorder from childhood sexual abuse she minimized on television while privately reliving nightly. Behind that megawatt smile lies a woman whose spiritual advisor embezzled $20 million while she preached abundance, whose father died believing she wasn't his biological child, and who built an entire network that lost $500 million because she confused being needed with being loved. What you're about to discover will shatter the image of America's therapist, a woman who gave everyone advice while taking none herself. If Oprah ever made you believe in yourself, leave a like and subscribe below. There's a moment in Oprah Winfrey's childhood that explains everything. Being sent to buy groceries at age 6 with food stamps, while wearing a potato sack dress her grandmother Hattie Mae made from actual potato sacks. The store owner loudly announcing, "Another welfare baby," while other customers stared, learning that poverty wasn't just financial, but performative humiliation. Long before the world would know her as media's most powerful woman, she was Orpah Gail Winfrey, misspelled Oprah on her birth certificate. Born January the 29th, 1954, in rural Mississippi to Vernita Lee, an unmarried teenage housemaid, and Vernon Winfrey, who may not have been her biological father, a doubt that haunted them both until his death. The first 6 years with grandmother Hattie Mae on a pig farm without running water or electricity were simultaneously the most stable and traumatic of her life. Hattie Mae's parenting was strict discipline that crossed into harm. She'd punish Oprah with switches the child had to select herself, physical punishment that left marks for days. Reading the Bible by age 3 wasn't precocious. It was survival, because mistakes meant consequences. "Your grandmother loves you," relatives would say while Oprah recovered from punishments. "This is how we show love." She learned that love meant pain, that attention required perfection, that being smart might save her from being poor, but nothing saved you from being black in Mississippi. At 6, Oprah was sent to live with her mother Vernita in Milwaukee's inner city, going from rural poverty to urban chaos. Vernita worked as a maid during the day and had various relationships at night, leaving Oprah with whoever would watch her, including relatives who took advantage of her innocence starting when she was 9. The inappropriate conduct continued for years, while Oprah performed excellence at school, winning spelling bees with a smile, while suffering internally. "I learned to leave my body," Oprah would later reveal in therapy, to float above what was happening and narrate it like a story about someone else. School became Oprah's stage for performing survival. Teachers loved her because she was articulate, read voraciously, and never caused problems, not knowing she was silent from trauma, not temperament. She'd win oratory contests reciting speeches about hope while living without any. At 14, she experienced a pregnancy that ended in infant loss after 2 weeks, a secret she kept for decades. "Excellence was my mask," Oprah reflected. "The better I performed, the less anyone looked at what was behind the performance." Her father Vernon's intervention at 14, taking her to Nashville, imposing military discipline, requiring book reports for dinner, saved her life but added new pressure. He demanded perfection because he suspected she wasn't biologically his, needing her achievement to justify raising her. Every A+ was proof she deserved his name. Every success was retroactive legitimacy. "Daddy loved my accomplishments," Oprah understood later. "Not me, but what I could become, what I could prove." The scholarship to Tennessee State University wasn't escape but elevation of performance. Oprah became the first black female news anchor in Nashville at 19. Not from ambition, but from addiction to achievement that numbed trauma. The girl, who'd experienced severe childhood trauma, had learned that success meant people stopped hurting you. They just found subtler ways to cause pain. "I built an empire on teaching what I'd learned," Oprah reflected at 70. "The trauma makes you special. That pain is purpose. But I never learned to stop hurting. I just learned to monetize it." At 22, Oprah Winfrey stood outside WJZ-TV in Baltimore in 1976, having just been demoted from news anchor to morning talk show host because management said she was too emotional for news, her hair damaged from mandatory chemical straightening, living in a roach-infested apartment she could barely afford on $25,000 annually. She'd been recruited from Nashville as their diversity hire. The station needed a black woman to meet federal requirements, only to discover they wanted her to be someone else entirely. Straighter hair, lighter skin somehow, less emotion, more acceptable. She'd cry in bathroom stalls between broadcasts, eat entire cakes in her car, then starve for days from shame. There was no plan B, Oprah would later admit. But plan A required me to become someone I wasn't, and I was failing at that transformation. Those Baltimore years were exercises in professional humiliation. The news director, Richard Scher, told her she was unfit for television news, that her empathy was weakness, her connection with subjects unprofessional. They sent her to a voice coach to eliminate her Mississippi accent, to a salon that chemically burned her scalp so badly she was temporarily bald, to an image consultant who said she needed to lose weight constantly. Between assignments, she'd be loaned out for diversity events, the station's black face at white galas. "I was furniture with a pulse," Oprah reflected. Decorative diversity they could point to while destroying who I actually was. The demotion to People Are Talking with Richard Scher felt like career death. Morning talk shows were where serious journalists went to die, discussing recipes and local events instead of real news. But something unexpected happened. Oprah thrived when allowed to actually talk with people instead of at them. She'd ignore the scripted questions, genuinely connecting with guests, making housewives cry with recognition, turning fluff into feelings. The show's ratings exploded, beating Phil Donahue locally, proving emotion wasn't weakness, but power. "I succeeded by failing their way and finding mine," Oprah understood. The real shift came through weight and what it represented. Oprah had been gaining and losing the same 40 pounds since 14, eating feelings she couldn't express, starving for control she never had. In Baltimore, she reached 170 pounds on her 5'7" frame, considered unacceptable for television. But Dennis Swanson at WLS-TV in Chicago saw her audition tape and offered her AM Chicago anyway, saying, "You're exactly what we need, real." The move to Chicago in 1984 for $230,000 annually felt like winning lottery. But Oprah knew it was another test she could fail. But fate intervened through authenticity. AM Chicago was losing to Donahue when Oprah arrived, but within months she'd flipped the ratings by being what Baltimore had tried to beat out of her: emotional, empathetic, unapologetically black. She'd discuss weight struggles on air, childhood trauma, real issues instead of safe topics. The audience saw themselves in her imperfection. Within a year, the show was renamed The Oprah Winfrey Show, syndication offers pouring in. "I succeeded by being everything they said was wrong with me," Oprah reflected. The transformation from Baltimore failure to Chicago sensation happened because Oprah stopped performing acceptable and started being actual. But success triggered new trauma. Eating disorders intensified, the weight cycling publicly documented, every pound gained or lost, becoming national news. The money was overwhelming for someone raised on food stamps. The fame was terrifying for someone who'd been invisible. Success felt like another kind of abuse, she admitted. Everyone watching, touching, wanting pieces of someone I was still trying to find. The role of Sophia in The Color Purple wasn't supposed to launch Oprah Winfrey's film career. She was a talk show host with no acting experience, cast by Steven Spielberg after he saw her on television and thought her authenticity couldn't be taught. Oprah had never acted professionally, never been on a film set, never worked with directors or understood marks and lighting. She was 31, had just achieved syndication with her show, and risked everything for a role that required her to channel rage she'd spent decades suppressing. Quincy Jones, who'd recommended her, told Spielberg, "She's not an actress, but she is Sophia." The preparation required Oprah to access trauma she'd professionally packaged into inspiration, to feel rather than narrate pain. Behind the scenes, Oprah's performance was psychological excavation rather than acting. The character Sophia's defiance against abuse triggered memories Oprah had buried, fighting back internally while complying externally, the cost of suppressing rage to survive. When Sophia declares, "I've had enough," Oprah was speaking for every moment she'd smiled through pain, achieved through assault, succeeded despite sabotage. The famous dinner scene where Sophia fights back required 17 takes because Oprah kept breaking down, not in character, but as herself. "I wasn't playing Sophia," Oprah later admitted. "I was finally being the person I'd never been allowed to be, angry, defiant, unbroken." The physical transformation challenged everything. Oprah had to stop straightening her hair, letting it natural for the first time since Baltimore's chemical burns. She gained weight for the role, reaching 200 pounds, liberating and terrifying simultaneously. Spielberg protected her inexperience, using her authenticity rather than fighting it. When she didn't hit marks, he'd adjust cameras. When she'd cry between takes, he'd incorporate the emotion. "Oprah wasn't acting," Spielberg observed. "She was testifying, and we were documenting testimony." When The Color Purple released in December 1985, Oprah's 15 minutes of screen time transformed her from talk show host to cultural phenomenon. Critics who dismissed her show as housewife entertainment suddenly recognized depth. The performance earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress, validation that she was more than questions and comfort. Standing at the Oscars, wearing a dress that cost more than her grandmother's farm, Oprah felt not triumph, but terror. She'd revealed real pain publicly, and now everyone would want more. Success meant I'd have to keep excavating trauma for entertainment, she reflected. But even at this pinnacle moment, darkness lurked. The Oscar loss to Angelica Houston felt like confirmation she didn't belong in films. The weight gain for Sophia became tabloid fodder. Oprah's battle with the bulge, reducing her performance to pounds. The show's success meant less time for acting, more time managing an empire built on empathy she was too exhausted to feel. Spielberg wanted her for more films, but Oprah retreated to television where she controlled the narrative. Films required me to be vulnerable, she understood. Television let me make others vulnerable while I watched. The breakthrough's cost was public ownership of private pain. Sophia's story became Oprah's story, the performance confirming what audiences suspected, that behind the success was suffering, that excellence came from trauma, that the most powerful black woman in media was powerful because she'd survived what shouldn't be survivable. The Color Purple didn't launch my film career, Oprah reflected. It ended it. I'd shown too much truth for Hollywood, but perfect amount for television. The role that should have opened doors actually closed them. Oprah would act sporadically after, but never again with such dangerous authenticity. By 1995, Oprah Winfrey wasn't just a talk show host. She was a cultural institution commanding $170 million annually. Her show reaching 20 million viewers daily in 130 countries, making her the first black female billionaire in American history. She owned Harpo Productions outright, controlled every aspect of her empire, and had transformed confession into commodity, with audiences treating her couch like therapeutic altar. Her book club could make unknown authors millionaires overnight. Her endorsement elected presidents. Her weight loss made national news. The girl from rural Mississippi who'd worn potato sacks now wore Chanel, while teaching others to live their best life, a phrase she trademarked. But even at this impossible peak, Oprah was secretly binging and purging, taking medication for depression she couldn't publicly acknowledge, and building an empire on emotional labor that was exhausting her soul. The public saw endless triumph, the show generating $300 million annually, Harpo Films producing Beloved, the book club revolutionizing publishing. But privately, Oprah was drowning in the performance of perfection. She'd wake at 4 a.m. for workouts with Bob Greene, broadcasting fitness while hiding night eating. She'd tape shows about self-love while hating her body. She'd interview abuse survivors while minimizing her own trauma as character building. Between tapings, she'd retreat to her office, eating sleeves of cookies in isolation, then appear camera-ready minutes later. Success meant never admitting struggle, she reflected. I was everyone's therapist who needed therapy desperately. The relationship with Stedman Graham, ongoing since 1986, was partnership without wedding, commitment without legal binding. They'd been engaged since 1992, but never married, Oprah knowing marriage would mean sharing control she'd fought to achieve. Stedman accepted being Oprah's partner rather than husband, understanding his role was support, not equal billing. They lived together, but separately. Different bedrooms, different schedules, different lives intersecting for public events. Stedman was my proof I could be loved, Oprah admitted, but not my priority. The show was my real relationship. Working with everyone from presidents to prisoners, Oprah became confessor to America, holding space for pain while never revealing her own. The famous ugly cry that audiences loved was real. She'd weep with guests, then continue crying after cameras stopped, overwhelmed by collective trauma she absorbed daily. She'd do 220 shows annually, each one emotional excavation, leaving her depleted but unable to stop. I was addicted to being needed, she understood. Every show was a fix. Every confession made me essential. Success is the most beautiful prison, Oprah told her therapist during this period. Everyone sees the empire, not the emperor naked inside it. By 1998, at the absolute peak of cultural influence, Oprah had everything measurable: wealth beyond imagination, power beyond precedent, influence beyond borders. But she also had undiagnosed binge eating disorder, depression requiring medication, and exhaustion from performing wisdom she didn't feel. The Oprah everyone saw was brand, not person, accessible but untouchable, everywhere but nowhere, helping everyone while slowly disappearing. The weight became metaphor and reality. Every pound gained was public failure. Every loss temporary victory. The liquid diet that dropped 67 pounds became national inspiration until she gained it back with interest. The wagon of fat she pulled on stage to represent weight loss became image that haunted, Oprah literally dragging her former self publicly. My body was America's business, she reflected. Every pound was vote on my worth. But the weight was protection, padding against pain that success couldn't cure. The billions couldn't buy her thinness because thinness meant vulnerability, and vulnerability was what she sold, not what she lived. Oprah's relationship with Stedman Graham began in 1986 as mutual convenience disguised as romance. She needed evidence she was lovable, despite the trauma. He needed association with power his own career couldn't achieve. They met at a charity event where Stedman, a public relations executive, saw opportunity in Oprah's rising influence, while she saw stability in his 6'6" frame and corporate bearing. Their first dates were negotiations of image, where to be seen, how to appear candid, managing the narrative of Oprah finding love despite weight and wealth. Stedman was casting for the role of my partner, Oprah reflected decades later. I cast him because he understood it was performance, not passion. The 1992 engagement that never became marriage revealed the relationship's true structure. Stedman proposed at Oprah's Indiana farmhouse, understanding she'd say yes to engagement, but never to wedding. They maintained the fiction of planning for years, while both knew marriage would mean Oprah sharing control she'd killed herself to achieve. Stedman accepted his role, +1 at events, proof of heterosexuality when rumors circulated, stable presence in unstable life. Marriage would have destroyed us, Oprah admitted. He'd have become Mr. Winfrey, and I'd have become less than whole. The relationship's rules were corporate rather than romantic. Separate bedrooms in every property, scheduled time together like board meetings. No children because Oprah knew she'd replicate trauma despite intentions. Stedman traveled for his speaking business while Oprah built empire, intersecting for photographed moments that suggested intimacy they didn't maintain privately. He'd attend tapings, but wasn't allowed opinions on content. He'd appear at parties, but leave early while she worked rooms. We were parallel lives occasionally crossing, Stedman told friends. Not intersection, but adjacency. But the deepest relationship was with Gayle King, the friendship that survived what romance couldn't. Meeting his 20s television colleagues in Baltimore, Gayle became what Stedman could never be. Witness to Oprah's becoming, keeper of secrets, the one person who knew Oprah from Mississippi, not just Oprah the brand. Their connection sparked speculation they were lovers, which Oprah denied with exhausting frequency. If we were gay, we'd tell you, she'd insist, not understanding that intimacy doesn't require sexuality. Gayle was mother, sister, therapist, friend, every role Oprah needed filled without threatening control. The pattern with family revealed Oprah's real relationship struggles. She supported everyone financially. Her mother, Vernita, received monthly allowances despite their complicated history. Cousins got houses and cars. Half-siblings emerged wanting pieces of empire. But money replaced intimacy. She'd write checks instead of visiting, send assistance instead of calling. When her daughter girls from South Africa visited, Oprah performed maternal love she didn't feel, exhausted by their need when her whole life was managing others' needs. I gave everyone everything except presence, she understood, because presence required feeling, and feeling was dangerous. Love for me was transaction, Oprah finally admitted at 65. I paid for affection, performed for acceptance, produced for approval, but actual intimacy, being known, seen, held without achieving, terrified me more than poverty ever did. The relationship with Stedman continued through momentum, neither having energy to end what had lasted 38 years. They lived in same houses but different worlds, appeared at events holding hands that hadn't touched privately in decades. The most successful black woman in history couldn't successfully love because love required vulnerability her trauma wouldn't permit, trust her experience hadn't taught, and surrender her control couldn't survive. In January 2020, during her Vision Tour in Los Angeles, Oprah Winfrey collapsed backstage from what was initially reported as exhaustion, but was actually a severe panic attack that mimicked cardiac symptoms, chest pain so intense she thought she was dying, left arm numbness, and the certainty that 70 years of suppressed trauma was finally collecting payment. The medical examination revealed more than anxiety. Oprah's cortisol levels were dangerously elevated from decades of chronic stress. Her blood pressure required immediate medication despite her fitness routine, and brain scans showed markers consistent with complex PTSD that had been mismanaged as drive for 50 years. "My body kept receipts for every trauma," Oprah told her doctor, and decided to present the bill simultaneously. The exact medical crisis was cascading system rebellion. Years of binge eating followed by extreme dieting had destroyed her metabolism. Her body couldn't regulate insulin properly, constantly storing fat as protection against starvation, it remembered. The yo-yo dieting that made headlines had caused gallbladder removal, prediabetes, and thyroid dysfunction requiring lifelong medication. Her knees were bone on bone from decades of weight cycling, requiring eventual replacement. But the psychological evaluation revealed the deeper crisis. Oprah had been dissociating for decades, watching herself perform from outside her body, treating Oprah as character rather than self. The medication trials were their own torture. Antidepressants that worked made her emotionally flat, unable to cry on cue for audiences expecting emotion. Anxiety medication that calmed also sedated, making the energy required for empire impossible. She tried ketamine therapy, EMDR for trauma, even psychedelic-assisted therapy that revealed memories she'd packaged as inspiration were actually unprocessed horror. Every treatment showed me I'd never actually healed, Oprah realized. Just monetized the wounds, made them productive. The pandemic forced stillness that became Oprah's real crisis. Without audiences, without production, without the constant motion that had defined her, she had to exist with herself, and discovered she didn't know who that was. The eating disorder exploded without external accountability. She'd order massive amounts of food, eat in isolation, purge through exercise or fasting, the cycle accelerating with nowhere to perform recovery. Weight climbed to numbers she wouldn't reveal. Body rebellion against decades of control. "COVID didn't make me sick," Oprah admitted. "It revealed I'd always been sick, just too busy to notice." Recovery required admitting what empire had hidden. Oprah entered intensive therapy for the eating disorder at 66, the age most people retire, finally addressing trauma she'd built billions discussing, but never healing. The treatment revealed her entire life had been trauma response. Achievement as armor, success as survival, helping others to avoid helping herself. The billions couldn't cure what started in Mississippi. The influence couldn't erase the violations. The empire couldn't fill the emptiness that food temporarily numbed. The diagnosis was almost relief, Oprah told Gayle, finally understanding that I wasn't weak or lacking willpower. My brain was damaged from childhood trauma, trying to protect me through behaviors that were slowly killing me. The treatment continues daily. Therapy that exhausts, medication that helps but doesn't heal. The recognition that at 70, she's just beginning to meet whoever Oprah was before the world needed Oprah. The woman who'd taught millions to live their best life was finally learning to live any life that wasn't performance, wasn't achievement, wasn't the exhausting effort of being everyone's inspiration while dying inside. The call came at 2:15 a.m. on November 22, 2018, Thanksgiving Day, while Oprah was at her Montecito estate preparing for her annual gratitude gathering, her assistant speaking carefully. "Your mother Vernita has passed." Vernita Lee died at 83 in Milwaukee, the city where she'd left Oprah with relatives who violated her, where poverty meant survival at any cost, where their relationship had fractured beyond repair despite Oprah's millions trying to bridge it. Oprah didn't cry initially. She sat in her $90 million estate feeling nothing, then everything, then rage that Vernita died on Thanksgiving. Even her death was about taking from my joy, Oprah would later tell her therapist, making the day about her absence rather than presence. The relationship with Vernita had been Oprah's most expensive emotional transaction. Monthly allowances of $50,000 weren't enough. The Nashville house wasn't enough. The cars, vacations, and credit cards weren't enough. Vernita wanted what money couldn't buy, to be Oprah's mother rather than recipient of Oprah's charity. She'd sell stories to tabloids about Oprah's coldness, her abandonment of family, while cashing checks that same daughter sent. I paid her to be my mother, Oprah reflected, but she performed it as poorly as she'd done for free. The funeral in Nashville was Oprah's production, not Vernita's celebration. Oprah controlled every detail, the flowers, the music, the speakers, creating the mother-daughter relationship in death they'd never achieved in life. She delivered a eulogy about gratitude and grace while feeling fury and relief. The extended family attended for inheritance possibilities, cousins who'd never called suddenly grieving publicly. I buried a stranger I'd spent 70 years trying to love, Oprah admitted, and realized I'd been mourning her my whole life anyway. But the deeper loss came in 2003 with the death of her brother Jeffrey Lee from AIDS-related complications at 29, a death Oprah had hidden from public for years. Jeffrey had struggled with addiction, sexuality, and being Oprah's invisible sibling. She'd paid for treatments, rehab attempts, housing, but always through intermediaries, maintaining distance from his chaos. When he died, Oprah didn't attend the funeral, sending flowers and a check instead. Jeffrey reminded me of everything I'd escaped, she later admitted. His existence made my success feel like survivor's guilt. The pattern of loss revealed Oprah's systematic isolation from blood relatives. Her sister Patricia, given up for adoption before Oprah was born, had surfaced in 2010 seeking connection, not money, the only relative who didn't lead with a request. Another half-sister, Patricia Lee Lloyd, had died in 2003 from addiction. Oprah had tried to treat with checkbook. Her father Vernon's death came with questions about paternity he'd carried silently, dying uncertain if Oprah was biologically his. Their relationship always qualified by that question mark. I've lost everyone, but was never really connected to anyone, Oprah reflected at 70. Money became my family language, but it only spoke distance. The billions she'd earned created walls rather than bridges. Every relative saw her as ATM rather than Oprah. Every death was complicated by resentment, theirs at her success, hers at their need. The girl who'd been abandoned, violated, and neglected had become the woman who paid for family rather than having one, who performed daughter, sister, and cousin for people who wanted her money more than her presence. At 70, Oprah had outlived the relatives who damaged her and supported the ones who'd used her. But neither relationship had taught her how to actually love or be loved without transaction. By 2011, Oprah Winfrey launched OWN, Oprah Winfrey Network, with Discovery Communications, investing $180 million of her own money into a network that lost $330 million in its first year, hemorrhaging viewers and advertisers, while Oprah discovered that being a talk show host didn't translate to running a media network. The empire that seemed invincible was suddenly vulnerable, with staff layoffs, show cancellations, and Discovery threatening to pull funding unless dramatic changes were made. I went from media queen to media emergency, Oprah reflected. Same name, different desperation. The network that was supposed to be my legacy was becoming my humiliation. The systematic failure of OWN revealed Oprah's dangerous disconnect from reality. She'd assumed her brand automatically meant success. that audiences would follow her anywhere, that the magic of the Oprah Winfrey Show was transferable. Instead, she discovered that daytime viewers didn't translate to primetime, that her demographic was aging out, that younger audiences saw her as their mother's inspiration, not theirs. Shows were expensive vanity projects. Oprah's next chapter cost $500,000 per episode, but drew fewer viewers than cable reruns. "I built a network for who I thought I was," Oprah admitted, "not who audiences needed me to be." Behind the scenes, Oprah's leadership style was revealed as controlling chaos. She'd micromanage minute details while missing major problems, fire executives who disagreed, surround herself with people who validated rather than challenged. The spiritual advisors she'd promoted on her show were now paid consultants, costing millions while providing nothing but affirmation. Her spiritual advisor, Marianne Williamson, had been given shows that failed spectacularly. The transformation content she believed in wasn't what audiences wanted. They wanted escape, not education. "I was selling enlightenment to people who wanted entertainment," Oprah understood too late. The financial restructuring was humiliating for someone worth $3 billion. Discovery took operational control, essentially making Oprah an employee of her own network. She had to return to appearing on air daily, something she'd escaped by ending her talk show. The celebrity interviews that once happened on her couch now required her traveling to them, diminished from destination to delivery service. Weight Watchers bought 10% of her for $43 million, making her body literally stockholder commodity. "I went from owner to owned," Oprah reflected. "My body, my brand, my network, all managed by others who saw dollar signs, not dignity." The slow resurrection came through accepting diminishment. OWN eventually found footing with scripted dramas targeting Black audiences Oprah had transcended during her talk show years. Greenleaf, Queen Sugar, content she didn't create or particularly connect with, but that paid bills. She had to license her image for products she didn't use, appear at Weight Watchers meetings like multi-level marketing, perform Oprah for audiences who remembered when it wasn't performance. Success became about managing decline gracefully, she admitted, from revolution to reruns. By 2024, OWN was profitable but irrelevant to cultural conversation. Oprah's influence had shifted from trendsetter to elder stateswoman, from essential to occasional. The book club still moved copies, but not culture. The interviews still drew viewers, but not water cooler discussion. She'd rebuilt from near bankruptcy to stability. But stability felt like death for someone who defined herself through growth. At 70, Oprah Winfrey was still worth billions, but worth less culturally, still working, but wondering why, still inspiring, but exhausted from the effort. The network that was supposed to be her monument had become her mortgage, requiring constant feeding just to survive. By 2024, Oprah Winfrey's appearance at her own State of Weight special became uncomfortable viewing when she admitted to using weight loss medication after decades of preaching willpower, her hands trembling slightly from the medication's side effects while defending a decision that felt like betrayal to millions who'd followed her dieting journey for 40 years. What the public didn't know was that Oprah had been experiencing cognitive changes her doctors attributed to chronic stress and decades of eating disorders. Forgetting names of longtime staff, repeating stories within the same conversation, sometimes believing she was still taping her talk show that ended 13 years ago. At 70, the woman who'd built an empire on authentic connection was struggling to connect with her own memories. The cognitive shifts manifested in increasingly visible ways. During recent interviews, Oprah would lose her train of thought mid-sentence, covering with practiced phrases, while assistants whispered reminders. She'd reference conversations that never happened, combine different events into impossible narratives. The famous ability to remember every audience member's story was gone. She couldn't recall names of people she'd worked with for decades. The medication for weight loss had side effects: nausea that prevented eating, tremors that made holding things difficult, and mental fog that clouded the sharp intelligence that built billions. "I'm disappearing while everyone watches," Oprah told her doctor. "The pills that make me thin make me less me." Public response to her weight loss medication admission was brutal. After 40 years of selling struggle, of making weight loss spiritual journey rather than medical intervention, the revelation that she'd turned to pharmaceutical solution felt like betrayal. Comment sections filled with anger from people who'd bought her cookbooks, joined Weight Watchers because of her, believed that weight loss was about self-love rather than self-medication. The authenticity that had been her brand was questioned. If she'd lied about this, what else was performance? "I became fraud overnight," Oprah reflected. 40 years of trust destroyed by admitting I couldn't do what I'd taught others they could. The isolation had become complete architecture of managed decline. Oprah lived between multiple estates, Montecito, Maui, Telluride, but felt at home nowhere, each property a museum to success that felt historical rather than current. Stedman maintained his parallel life, their relationship now mostly theoretical. Gail visited but struggled with Oprah's memory issues, having to reintroduce topics, pretend conversations were new. The daughter girls from South Africa she'd educated were adults who rarely contacted her, their success not translating to connection. "I funded futures but didn't create family," Oprah realized. Recent attempts at relevance felt desperate. The podcast that reached smaller audiences than single segments of her old show. The book club selections that seemed algorithmic rather than authentic. The spiritual content that felt recycled from decades-old shows. She'd become her own tribute act, performing Oprah for audiences who remembered when it wasn't performance. The weight loss medication had worked. She was thinner at 70 than she'd been at 30. But thin Oprah wasn't happy. Oprah, just smaller surface for same pain. "I've become what I sold," Oprah admitted during a therapy session. "A brand, a lesson, a cautionary tale about getting everything you wanted and discovering it wasn't what you needed." The work continued through momentum, network obligations, contracted appearances, maintaining the empire that had become prison. At 70, Oprah Winfrey existed in permanent performance of inspiration, while privately wondering what she was inspiring people toward. Success that isolated, achievement that exhausted, transformation that never actually transformed the pain that started it all. The girl from Mississippi had conquered everything except the trauma that made her conquer. And now, with nothing left to achieve, that trauma was all that remained. Today, at 71, Oprah Winfrey continues broadcasting inspiration while taking medication that manages her weight but clouds her mind, attending therapy that reveals more damage than healing, and maintaining an empire worth $3 billion that feels more like elaborate sarcophagus than achievement. She rises each morning in one of her many estates, never sure which feels like home, takes pills for conditions from metabolic to mental, and prepares for another day of being Oprah when she's still trying to find Orpah. Her network survives but doesn't thrive. Her influence endures but doesn't evolution. She works now through obligation rather than passion, each appearance requiring more effort to maintain the illusion of the Oprah everyone needs her to be. The truth in Oprah's story: sometimes those who teach healing are the most wounded. Those who sell transformation are the most stuck. And you can inspire billions while dying inside from the performance of perfection. If this moved you, leave a like and subscribe for more stories of those who remind us that even billionaires can be bankrupt in ways money can't fix.